네, 버나드 케인과 함께하는 미국 주식 시간에서는 나스닥을 능가할 만한 그런 유망한 종목들을 찾아드리고 있고 또 많은 개미 투자자분들께서 선호하시는 종목에 대한 자세한 분석까지 도와드리고 있습니다. 그동안 소개해드렸던 종목들 베스트 톱5 수익률 함께 체크하고 오시죠. 네, 먼저 더 트레이드 데스크 부동의 1위를 유지해주고 있습니다. 최근에 미국 시장 흐름이 좋았는데 이런 양호한 흐름 때문에 상승률이 많이 회복된 모습입니다. 모든 종목들이 일단 두 자릿대 상승률을 기록하고 있고요. TTD가 방송일 종가 72.78달러였는데 어제는 2.7% 상승하면서 96달러 위에서 거래를 마쳤습니다. 현재까지의 상승률은 31.9%대 기록하고 있습니다. 두 번째 종목은 빌닷컴이고요. 방송일 종가 199.7달러라고 적혀 있습니다. 어제는 253달러에서 거래 마쳤고 현재까지의 상승률 26%입니다. 세 번째 종목 스노우플레이크고요. 스노우플레이크는 오늘 좀 떨어지긴 했습니다. 오늘장에서 2% 떨어지긴 했지만 그래도 이번 주에 미증시 랠리가 있었기 때문에 상승률 오히려 회복해준 모습이고요. 방송일 종가 298달러, 어제는 349달러에서 종가 마쳤습니다. 네 번째 종목은 AMN 헬스케어 서비스입니다. 상승률 11.87% 기록하고 있는데 어제도 0.8%가량 올라주면서 122달러 선에서 거래를 마쳤습니다. 마지막 종목 마이크로소프트, 화요일에 소개해드릴 때는 한 자릿대로 상승률이 내려갔었는데 다행히 꾸준히 수익을 좀 얻어주면서 334달러 선에서 어제 종가 마무리했습니다. 현재까지의 상승률은 11.5% 기록하고 있네요. 네, 버니의 베스트 탑5 종목들 살펴보고 돌아왔습니다. 미증시 산타랠리가 아니라 미니 산타랠리다라는 말이 현재 내려지고 있는데 평가가 내려지고 있는데 그런 말에 힘입어서 모든 종목들이 좀 상승률을 회복해준 것 같아서 저도 정말 기분이 좋습니다. 자, 오늘은 화요일에 이야기했던 메타플랫폼스에 대해서 이야기 더 나눠볼 텐데 사실 메타버스가 지금 실생활에 많이 쓰이는 그런 종목, 그런 기술이 아니기 때문에 메타버스는 정말 이 꿈을 먹고 사는 주식이다 이런 말들이 많습니다. 그래서 지금은 기대감 때문에 주식이 많이 올랐지만 앞으로는 주식이 좀 떨어질 수도 있다 이런 평가도 있거든요. 그래서 메타가 앞으로 어떤 모습을 보일지 과거부터 현재까지 성장성을 좀 짚어주실까요?
Okay, so let's just take a look. Right here is a 10-year chart of Facebook, now Meta. And you can see that from 2012 till now, it's looked like it's done great, and it has. But when I look at the last 5 years and I compare Facebook to the Nasdaq composite, or the Nasdaq 100, I'm sorry, you can see that there are periods where it's underperformed and outperformed. But generally speaking, it's about a market performer right now. It's slightly underperformed over the last, say, 4 months, but other than that, it's a market performer. When I go back and I look at it, okay, we have to think about this. The great performance in Facebook or Meta was pre-2014. Now, since then, it's had 2 other years, and we can look at it right here on this chart. It's had 2 other years where it's outperformed significantly, 2015 and 2017. So I listed on the top chart the general graph of Facebook since 2012, and on the bottom clip is the comparison of Facebook to the Nasdaq 100. And so you can see that from 2012 up through 2014, that was a significant outperformance. And then you can see in 2015, the second black line sloping up, that was a substantial outperformance again. In 2017, that outperformance was slight. In 2015, that red line going across the top of the bottom chart shows that it's slightly underperformed. In 2018, it clearly underperformed. In 2020, towards the end of the year, it's underperformed. And in 2021, it's had a little bit of fits and starts. But the 2 purple lines shows the general approach where Facebook was an outperforming stock into the end of 2017. And since the end of 2017, it has been a fractionally underperforming stock. And I think this reason happens, the biggest part of this reason is the bigger the company gets, the harder it is to be able to continue to outperform the stock market. And what we're really interested in is stocks that outperform the market. If we can have a collection of 15 to 25 stocks that all outperform the market over a 3 to 5 year window, that's how you get great returns. Now, this chart basically goes into the last 2 years, and you can see how choppy this performance is. The black lines is where Meta or Facebook starts to outperform on the bottom clip the stock market. And you can see then I basically refer up to the top chart, which is the Facebook price as a whole. The red lines, the red vertical lines, the arrows, are when Facebook underperforms. And we can see that all the gains occur when Facebook is outperforming the stock market. But I think if we look at the last 2 years, there's too much chop here to be able to say, I want in and I think this is great. When we find stocks that outperform the stock market and do so on a great basis, like Upstart, like different companies that we've looked at, IDEX, those outperformances are consistent and last from anywhere from 9 months to 2 years. So we're not really trying to get in and out of the stock all the time. We want to be able to find stocks that continuously and significantly outperform the stock market, and so we don't have to necessarily time ourselves with whether we're going to buy this stock and have it in our portfolio or not have it in our portfolio.
네, 메타플랫폼스에 대해서 자세하게 차트까지 설명을 해주셨고 이런 종목들을 포트에 넣어야 하냐 말아야 하냐라는 최대의 고민을 또 내년에도 이어가 봐야겠죠. 내년도에도 메타버스와 관련해서 포트폴리오를 좀 다양하게 구성하고 싶은데 좀 주의해야 할 점이 있을까요?
When we think about Facebook or any other stock, what we're really trying to do is develop a portfolio of these 15 to 25 stocks that we can hold for 3 to 5 years, theoretically. Like we hold a basket of 15 to 25 stocks for 3 to 5 years. Not all the stocks stay in there that entire time, but we're constantly rotating to keep our best 15 to 25 stocks in this portfolio for 3 to 5 years so that then we outperform the market. But we're also having to think about what the market's done as a whole. And we talked earlier this year, say in July, we talked about some of the internals within the stock market starting to weaken a little bit. And what I mean by that is we have all sorts of different size companies in the stock market. We've got big companies, we've got small companies, we've got medium-sized companies. We've got a variety of industries. We've got technology sectors, we've got consumer sectors, we've got all sorts, we've got energy sectors. What we want to have for a really healthy market is a market that's going up where there's not a lot of erosion, significant erosion within the market as a whole by different sectors of stocks. Most of the time what happens is the big performing stocks are owned by so many people and they're owned by so many hedge funds, life insurance companies, pension funds, that sort of thing. So they have a great ownership that doesn't necessarily turn over. The smaller stocks, those are the ones that we really want to see because when those stocks are going up, the market has a really good setup. So what we want to think about is like a composite and how the composite of stocks, how the stocks that are not the biggest stocks doing, but how the overall market's doing. So what I wanted to talk about, because we just had basically a 5 or 6% correction in the markets, is how does this correction compare to previous markets? So what I did is I looked at our current market, and I want to compare that back to the market that we've been in for the last, say, year and a half or so, to the market that we had in, say, 2015 and 16. I want to stay away from a little bit of 2018 because that's just a little bit different market. But if we go back and we look at this, the chart here is basically a four-pronged chart. The top part of the chart is the S&P 500, just general prices between mid-2014 and mid-2017. The second section, that green section, is the number of new highs in the New York Composite that we have on a daily basis. And that ranges anywhere from, say, 25 to 450 stocks. The red line, or the red histogram, is the number of new lows within that same New York Composite. And then the bottom clip is the difference between new highs and new lows. Let's just think about new lows, because when we break down, we tend to see more new lows, or when the stock market has a concern about itself, we'll start to see more new lows than what we've seen. And that's what we talked about last July. We saw too many new lows to be able to say the stock market's going to continue to go straight up. But I was still very positive throughout till the end of the year. And I think that's worked out. And I think we're in a bit of a rally right now that's going to last through the end of the year into next year. If we look at the number of new lows, I drew a horizontal arrow, at around 200. So what we can see is in this sector right here, there are different times when we've exceeded that, and different corrections that we see that we wind up finding the number of new lows has gone past 200. When we don't have the number of new lows popping up to around 200 or so, that market continued to go higher. And that's what we saw between 2016 all the way through that second portion, or the first portion of 2017. And on the bottom clip here, I boxed that out in red. You can see that the net difference stayed positive. New highs were always more than new lows during that whole year and a half period. And look at how well the stock market did. We can also see that the number of new lows in that red part of the histogram never got close to 200. So that's a piece of information, and let's compare that piece of information to what we see right now. What I did, same chart, this goes back from, say, June of 2020 to current. So what we've had is we have a situation where I put that same arrow at 200. It's actually higher than that because we've never got more than 140 new lows in a course of a day. And that's new 52-week lows. So even though the stock market is near the highs of the previous 52 weeks, these are the number of stocks that are making new 52-week lows. We can see that for the whole course of this last year and a half, look at how little the new 52-week lows were. We hardly had any. And in fact, we've only gotten up to 140 lately. So I think this is a positive piece of information. When I go down to the bottom and I box out that same thing, we can see that basically all the way through until late November, we never had any net new lows greater than new highs. We basically stayed positive through that whole period, so we stayed above the zero line. I think that's significant. Now, we want to continue to look forward on this, and we want to be able to monitor how this looks going forward. But when we're looking for our basket of securities of 15 or 25 stocks, of which Meta may or may not be one, we want to be able to understand how healthy our stock market is. What I've talked about before is we've had 7, 8 months of continuously higher closes month over month. And when we get periods of 7 consecutive months or more, that most often leads to we're higher in 3 months, we're higher in 6 months, we're higher than in a year looking forward. So what I did here is I took a little bit more of a detailed look at, you can see the erosion that I talked about that we saw in June and July, basically July, where the stock market started making new highs, the red arrow on the top, and this is the Nasdaq composite, and the number of new highs relative to new lows started to go down. And you can see it basically trickled down a little bit below zero, not much, but a little bit. Now what we've done is we made this new high lately at the end of November, or mid-November, we had a significant erosion of new lows exceeding new highs while we're at the top of the market. So that opens us up for a sell-off, and that's what I've been looking at. Now, looking forward to this, if we think about what this advanced decline line does, so we're taking the new highs and new lows, okay, which is just whether they're making new 52-week highs or new 52-week lows in the Nasdaq composite. And now we want to think about what the advanced decline line, number of stocks that are going up that day relative to number of stocks that are going down that day. Okay, so when we're rallying, we should have a lot more stocks going up than going down. And we can see that when we look at the S&P 500 on the top clip, we can see with my purple arrow that we've had the number of stocks going up still. But when we look at the Nasdaq composite for the second half of this year, it hasn't been as healthy. Now, we had the breakdown in July and August, and we basically traded flat, and then we had a more substantial breakdown. Well, let's take this piece of information, which is looking at it for the course of this year, and compare that over a longer time frame. So what I did here is this is the last, say, 5 years. And we can see the same thing we've seen before, is that it's confusing or tricky to look at the advanced decline line on the major indices like the S&P 500, like the Nasdaq 100. But when we look at it on the composite basis and we look at all 2,500 stocks that are within the New York composite, we can see that things move a little bit differently. Now, what I did is I've highlighted on the bottom chart where the advanced decline line has been with the purple line for this year, like we just talked about before. But then there's this horizontal box at the bottom. When we get down into that horizontal box, that has tended, outside of the initial COVID sell-off that we had, which was a complete surprise to everybody in terms of the whole virus and everything else that we had, we can see that we're in areas that tend to stop. And then the market tends to turn around. And so that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a rally that we can see out of this prices into December and going forward. And I think the basket of our 15 to 25 stocks, of which Meta may or may not be one, is well set up going into the first half of 2022.
네, 버니와 함께하는 미국 주식 시간에서 이제 버나드 케인 선생님이 내년도 미국 주식은 중소형주를 주목하는 게 좋다라고 말씀을 좀 해주셨습니다. 대형 종목들은 3년 동안 5년, 3년에서 5년 사이에 꾸준히 갖고 가도 되지만 그 안에서 종목들을 좀 교체하는 게 굉장히 중요한데 이제 중소형주들은 탄력이 좋다 보니까 상승률이 어마어마하다라고 말씀해 주시면서 전략들 세워드렸으니까 과연 다음 주에는 어떤 종목을 소개해 주실지 집중해 주시기 바라겠습니다. 여기까지 버니와 함께하는 미국 주식 시간이었습니다.